Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to EIG's 48th webinar, a fireside chat discussion focused on accelerating new product introduction through Agile Sprints, phase gate discipline, and the Scaled Agile Framework SAFe. Our industry guest speaker, Shawn Yates, Associate Principal Expert at Siemens Advanta, together with Dr. Phil Samuel and Dr. Mark Sneeringer, and I are looking forward to an interactive discussion with your participation. Again, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate the time that you've taken, especially in light of the coronavirus pandemic and the Omicron latest variant. We hope that your family are healthy and safe. This is a capstone webinar. We've actually had 4 focused webinars. The first in the series was focused on building a foundation, the second on rational risk-taking, and the third on digital transformation. And the fourth was on accelerating new product introduction with Agile Sprints, aligned with the phase gate discipline. Our last webinar was a fireside chat, and it was really focused more on digitalization. And today's webinar focuses on how to leverage the best of the NPI approaches, Agile Sprints, phase gate discipline, and the Scaled Agile Framework. They all have their place, and we'll talk about that. We believe that all these do have their place, and it's really dependent on your product cycle type, life cycle type, your maturity of your new product introduction processes, marketplace competitive, your company size, and your culture. We will discuss the best way to discover the synergies so that you can develop those self-generating and self-funding growth opportunities using 90-day action plan sprints. Again, we want this to be an interactive webinar, so please be ready to ask questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and use the pollev.com/JimDeVries073 that you'll find in the chat to answer the polling questions. Just a little background. My name is Jim DeVries, founder, president of Enhanced International Group. We're an exchange of passionate experts to guide your transformation to provide self-generating and self-funding results. We have over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers that are thought leaders that have been vetted as best in class. EIG serves as that master integrator to provide you access to the best and brightest companies. So we're like a Swiss Army knife, you may say. Our team is dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by leveraging EIG's partner tenured thought leadership expertise. Our goal is to meet and exceed your expectation with customized, predictable, sustainable, and repeatable 90-day self-funding programs, providing you that competitive advantage. Since 2020 of March, we've been having webinars. This is again the 48th. We divide them up into 4 categories: people, which is your organization, and things like talent management, process, which is what we're talking about here, new product introduction, to supply chain and supply chain risk resiliency, to data and how to build a resilient digital ecosystem, to technology and using technology to get us there. This week, or in the next January, we're going to have webinars continuing on digitization, new product introduction, artificial intelligence, supply chain risk and resiliency. And so again, look for those webinars, and the webinars are free, and our past 48 webinars or so can be found on EIG's webpage, consultingeig.com. Today, we're fortunate to have with us very highly respected leaders in the field of new product introduction. And I'll ask each to introduce himself, and we'll start with Dr. Phil Samuel, who's the author of a few books and an innovation expert. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Samuel. Pleased to be in the meeting. I spent a majority part of my career in the whole topic of innovation, new product development, and new business development, new business model development, and strategy side. Glad to be in the team.
Thank you, Phil. And Dr. Mark Sneeringer, who is a continuous improvement consultant, which under it, Mark is much more than that. He's done so many different things, but Mark, a few words of introduction.
Sure. This is actually a topic that I've been involved in basically all of my career, and have get excited about it from the standpoint of helping companies get things to market faster and with more robust products, and with the proper manufacturing process to do it. So one of my favorite topics.
Great. And then we have Shawn Yates, Associate Principal and Expert at Siemens Advanta. Shawn, a few words.
Yeah, definitely. First off, Jim and team, thanks for inviting me. I am super excited to be here. So I started life as an engineer and then got into process excellence with the help of Mark, actually, several years back. And since then, I've been deploying scaled agile at complex environments such as medical devices and mixed mode hardware and software. And I just love helping make people's daily life better by using the right processes. So I'm excited to be here, guys.
It's great to have you, Shawn. Thanks for coming. So we'll just get started here. Just a little bit of background. We've had 4 pretty intense webinars with a lot of thought leadership provided. We had our first webinar on the building a foundation of planning, communication, collaboration, and execution. Our second webinar, as you see here, is rational risk taking, in which we demonstrated taking risk can create differentiated value and speed, because it's all about speed to market here. And then our third webinar focused on digitalization with all the hyper automation, different tools that are out there today, and techniques from digital ethnography, biomimicry, trees, sentiment analysis, robust design optimization, CAD, K, all these different ways of automating things. We had a webinar on that. And then our fourth webinar was finding the balance between the Agile Sprint mindset and the phase gate execution mindset. So each webinar was pretty jam-packed. In our fifth webinar, we focused on digitization as a fireside chat. In our sixth webinar today, we're looking to streamline that overall MPI process to create your differentiation. So we're very excited to move forward today. These are the main topics today: accelerate everything from new product introduction, the paradox that we have between ideation and execution. How do you hand off? When is the right time? That'll be one topic. The second topic is ideation, and looking at that iterative agile sprint to eliminate uncertainty process. And our third topic is getting into execution and why we need a disciplined phase gate approach for fast production, product and service realization, I should say. And then the fourth is, how do we find all the synergies of unleashing the speed to market of leveraging agile sprints, phase gate discipline, and the scaled agile framework? And with that, we'll get started. And Mark is going to kick us off. Go, Mark.
Yeah. So Jim mentioned the sort of the paradox of, as you go from a sort of an idea all the way out to a product or service that the customers will value. There's this paradox, or there's this balance that has to happen between the front end, where really what you're doing is you're establishing knowledge. You have a bunch of assumptions, you have a bunch of unknowns, and you want to try to get that done quickly to get to the point where you have a concept that you can make into a product. The back end is more about, how do I take that idea and make it something solid that I can frankly make thousands or millions of. And that's where the phase gate type discipline, where you've got checks and balances and things like that in place, works well to get things out to the market in a reasonable time frame. So what we're going to be talking about is sort of this how do you deal with the front end, or the uncertainty there, and manage the risk in the back end of the execution risk. And that's why we will talk about both of these topics.
Thank you, Mark. Phil, you want to add some thoughts? You're on mute, by the way.
I think Mark hit the key aspect of the challenge. We can create a system structures that enable one side or the other. The tough road is creating a culture, a system, and a mindset to do both. One or the other is not sufficient. So we'll talk more about each of those differences in the next slides.
Okay. And Shawn, do you have any comments on this slide? Your first blush reaction to this?
So with my focus on SAFe, what I feel like is this all gets blended together into one whole system in SAFe. And it is two different things that need different skill sets and focuses, but we pull them together into one cohesive system, and that's how you make a good company. So no, I'm excited that see the model here. This is nice.
Great. All right, great dialogue. So with that, just to get some feedback from everybody online, we would like to gain your insight on the challenges that you're facing in your NPI processes. If you do have a phrase, please put an underscore between the words. And so as you can see there, somebody entered competing requirements. If they put an underscore when you type it, it's going to come out exactly like that. So as you have been undergoing NPI, what are some of the challenges that you've been facing? So just so we can get a better understanding of what things to focus on here in the webinar. Any comments from any of our esteemed guests here as far as resources that's popping out? That sounds all too familiar. Phil?
Yeah.
Or Mark? Or
yeah, for me, I mean, resources is a big one, and it's the right resources. So there are talents, or there's capabilities that vary as you move from that, unstructured, fuzzy idea all the way to having something that's very concrete and in production. So it's not just resources, but the right resources.
I like the business model one too, because I've recently been helping many companies want to get on the as a service boat, right? So they want to offer everything in the world as a service, so they get that monthly revenue. And so a lot of traditional companies are looking for a new business model to get onto that bandwagon.
Absolutely. I see that myself, is that there's companies now that want to find that recurring business that they can add as adjunct as a new business to what they're doing today. But that recurring, everybody wants a recurring model. And of course, that requires some kind of a hardware of new invention or new software that's unique in the marketplace.
Sometimes I had one group, it was, to be frank, it was air conditioning, and they were trying to sell cold air as a service. There was no new product. It was just a new mindset, and it worked. So,
Okay.
Competing requirements is an interesting one, because you could have competing requirements from customers, but you could also have internal in larger organizations. Two executive vice presidents might have competing requirements feeding down into the R&D organization, and you gotta sort that somehow. So that's an interesting one.
And sometimes it's you have an existing product or service, and the new idea might cannibalize or disrupt your existing. So then, do I destroy the cash cow? Can I have one more quarter with it, or do I fund and accelerate the next generation? Financially, it doesn't look appealing in the beginning. So those are, common challenges.
Yeah, but you know what, Phil, besides being a cash cow, it's probably a sacred cow, and you're going to have a lot of political challenges to sunset a legacy device or product line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even when the finances make perfect sense.
Yeah, what I find is a lot of companies aren't doing technology road mapping of saying, where can this go in the future?
Yeah.
So they're holding on to something that's generating, as you say, a lot of revenue. They don't know what that next gen product is. They don't want to invest in it because it's been the cash cow, especially for products that don't change very much over time. It's a real challenge versus a cell phone that changes every, 6 to 12 months. There's a new model. But in a lot of heavier industries, they struggle with this, eclipsing their sacred cow, as you said it, Shawn, very well.
Yeah.
The one really long phrase here of incorporating high-risk research into a product development, that's really what I think we're trying to address with this balanced or hybrid model. Because when there's a lot of uncertainty, which is what the high risk means to me, you don't want that in your final product development stage. I mean, and one of my mantras when I'm talking with folks is, when you get into that, actual product development, I don't want to see any inventions. I want all that taken care of before we get to that execution phase of turning that idea or turning that feasible concept into a capable product.
I think some of that's scale dependent, Mark, because like I worked with Philips, and there we definitely had a research group that was off inventing anti-gravity shoes. And once they invented it, it went to a business unit who then productionalized it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've worked with smaller companies that are much more in line with Eric Ries's lean startup, where they're innovating during product development because they're still exploring the needs, exploring the market, or creating the market. And so it's a lot more iterative to figure out exactly what it'll be as it goes along. So I think some of it might be scale or market dependent. Depends on the market too, the maturity of the market.
Scale and cost of failure too. I mean, if you say, if I'm 9/10 of the way into getting that product out there and I discover something new through this iterative process, and basically that 9/10 goes away, is that something you can afford? So
that's a great discussion. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Phil, ideation versus execution.
Yeah, so we split the whole idea of bringing new product and services to market into two category challenges. First one is what we call the function development. Can X do Y? That's about, is it feasible? Is it reproducible? Would it work? That's the kind of questions we ask. In the product development world, can we turn a feasible concept into a capable concept? And we draw some distinction on several dimensions. And so that's the whole idea behind how do we maneuver through the world of uncertainties versus how do we get into the world of fairly certain, but increasing reliability and durability and all the abilities. So as an example, the output of the function development area or stage or that phase, the goal is to make sure, can we come up with a feasible concept that the customer want? Is there a business model behind it? Is there a chance customers will like it, use it? That's the emphasis, feasibility. On the other side of the world, you have a feasible idea or a concept. Is it capable? Is it going to be reliable? Will it work everywhere? That's the kind of questions we'll be asking in the output from both of those stages. What inputs are needed for the first aspect? We need to know the unmet customer needs. We call them the solution neutral customer needs. What jobs are customers struggling to get done? Can we precisely quantify it? Can we precisely identify which needs are unmet? Then we go into the world of trends, technology trends, market trends to understand and assess opportunities on what technology or capability might address this customer need. Then, to Shawn's point about even if we have a viable product or a feasible concept, is there a business model that we can adopt to make it work? Those are the things, input we need to create a good function development process. On the other side, we have feasible ideas, but we need all these concepts as an input into developing the product. What the market says, can we make it work? Is it timely? All those questions get asked in terms of input. The scope of the function development is targeted functions, not all of it. So you will say a self-driving car, the focus in the function development is not so much about the air conditioning or the engine, etc., but more about our ability to sense information, process them, use artificial intelligence, deep learning, and make decisions quickly, just in time. You go to the other side, we'll say full product or service. Not only do we need those decisions using the sensors and deep learning, we also need to make sure the entire car works, and it works equally well where there is cell phone towers or satellites, where it is high temperature or dusty, where it is very busy streets of Mumbai or Beijing or remote areas of Montana. That's the kind of differences we will look at it. The competencies needed, both sides need high skills. Both sides need analysis and design, but the emphasis on the left side is more on ability to go scan, ability to have the mindset of the explorers to maneuver through the uncertain areas and then find that diamond in the rough. The competencies on the right side is very rigorous: engineering skills, supply chain skills, a lot of collaborative approaches to bring in a full product to market and the business models associated with it. What's the major risks on the left side? It's about the things that we don't know, things that we don't even know that we don't know. All of those becomes issues. The unknowns, the assumptions we make, implied or explicit, those will come and bite us later, potentially. Or there's an opportunity we might be leaving on the table. The risk on the other side is, can you execute well? Is it optimized well? Is your product going to be reliable? Is your business model robust? Would it work all the time? What do we need to avoid on the left side? When we see a concept that barely feasible, or we see a very promising concept but unfamiliar, we might just prematurely shut it down. That's the risk to avoid in the function development. On the other side, we should avoid inventing or going back to the start, saying that, oh, I'm in the middle of the product development, it's going to be launched in the next few months, but we want to restart. That's to be avoided. Timing, on the function development, due to uncertainties, there are lots of approximations. On the other side, we have very fixed schedules and plans associated with it. So we can see through these lenses how the two sides require different skills, cultures, and ability to manage and maneuver. Jim?
Yeah, so I'd just ask Shawn for his, when you look at this from a SAFe perspective, are you seeing these two areas as we've laid them out here?
I think it depends on context. I think in the hardware world, I definitely see this divide more clearly because we need to know proof of concept. You got a big physical thing you're trying to build. I think in the software world, like I've always called all of R&D from the very idea till the day you deploy it, product development. And we're doing iterations of both of these in the software because the cost of failure that Mark mentioned earlier, relatively speaking, pretty low in software. You just go recode something or change a variable or whatever.
Work, it's okay. And that's
if I'm developing a CT and I get to the end and realize a CAT scanner, right, guys? That, oh my God, I got to start over. That's millions of dollars. So I see it more in hardware, this crisp line, and I think in software it's more iterative in both of them.
Great point. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah. One of the things I think, Phil talked about, on the invention thing of saying something new comes up and I've got to go back. I've also seen companies where they actually are counting on an innovation or an invention happening somewhere in their fairly late in their product development cycle. They're moving along and this particular subsystem is still in the very much in the assumptions and and before a feasible design, but they're just cooking along saying it's going to drop in on such and such a date, and the probability of that happening is pretty low. So that's why sort of this aversion to invention, but even a bigger aversion to planned invention, or planning for invention late into your product cycle.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And if anyone on the line, if they have questions or additional comments on where they find themselves more in some of the challenges that they have, please feel free to enter into the chat. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, which is key uncertainties and assumptions. Phil?
Sure. If we look at step back and look at the statistics, 90% of the products failure in the market. Majority of the venture capital investments fail. So we step back and ask the question why, and a lot of it has to do with how we maneuver through the areas of uncertainties. Lots of products fail because we built something that we thought we knew will address the need. So knowing precisely the unmet customer need is one of the 4 key uncertainties that results in product, services, business model failure. So the key question is not solution-based customer need, it's asking the solution neutral customer need. People don't have the need for a drill, they have a need to create a hole. So the question is, what jobs are customers struggling to get done? And do you understand the characteristics of the requirements about the job, not about the solution? So in my example, you shouldn't be worried about the requirements about the drill. You should be worried about the requirements about the hole the customer is struggling to create. So that's the whole concept of the job to be done based approach to identifying the customer needs. And this can get very sophisticated when you go into the segmentation and all of those deep dive. Well, let's now go to the second topic. Okay, we precisely understand which customer needs are very important to customers and how they are struggling to get it done, meaning poor satisfaction. That now helps us zero in on the opportunity. Now, the next challenge is, okay, I understand the need. Do I have a feasible solution? What technology solutions will address precisely as a match for the unmet customer need? So that's the feasibility topic. That's often the topic of R&D. So doing R&D without understanding the one and not matching them is a recipe for failure. Now we move to the third challenge. We understand precisely the unmet customer need. We understand the opportunity from a technology or a feasible solution that addresses that need. It's still not enough. Do we have a viable business model? Do we have the right revenue model? Do you have the right channels? Do you have a way to create a unique customer experience? What is your cost structure? What does your partnership model look like? What's your brand strategy? There are about 11 components associated with a good business model, and we ought to be asking, do we have a good business model? I think Professor Glassman at one of the universities in Switzerland has studied the business model, thousands of them, and came up with the 55 business model patterns that they have found that companies use successfully to create wealth. We could go explore them and say, are any of them applicable in our situation? So those are 1, 2, and 3 very important uncertainties to be solved. Even if you have solved all of those three, there might be still additional things that causes the stakeholder to not adopt your solution. It could be a customer, it could be a regulatory agency, it could be your country level politics, all kinds of reasons might exist from a stakeholder adopting your solution. So we want to solve all of these four problems, especially in the left side of the bucket when we are exploring feasibility of concepts.
Thanks, Phil. Mark, your thoughts?
This breaking it down this way has been very enlightening for me in terms of how to organize that. What am I trying to do in terms of changing assumptions into knowledge? And so having, a lot of time spent on the technology feasibility over the years, and some to a certain extent on the customer needs, but the business model and the stakeholder adoption, bringing them into this discussion has helped a lot in terms of getting getting ideas that are viable and then getting them into products. So I like this way of categorizing these uncertainties.
Shawn, your thoughts?
Yeah, I like this model. I use a very similar one, and what we usually do with the customer early on when they're trying to do an NPI initiative is create a knowledge gap map. So we'll talk through all these questions and figure out all the unknowns and kind of associate a risk level to each one, and then set up experiments and sprints, which I think Phil's going to talk about in a minute, to close those knowledge gaps. And as they're closing the gaps, we can see the risk level decreasing. And at some point we say, okay, we know enough now to move forward. So I like the questions, that's the idea of not just technical, but all these other feasibilities we have to account. So it's very, very good process here.
Yes.
So we do have a comment in the chat right now, which is, aren't these all evolving at the same time? Ideation and execution should work hand in hand iteratively.
Yeah.
That's a good lead into the next slide.
Yeah, and I agree with the comment that, we're doing both. There's a certain amount you need up front. Am I building a car or a golf club? Like, there's a certain amount you get up front, but then at some point you do start into execution. And as you're going through your execution sprints, you might learn something new. And then Mark kind of touched on it before. The further along you get, the bigger that learning has to be for you to decide it's worth it to go back. And at some point, maybe it is worth it, maybe it isn't. You always have to be able to evaluate that, and you have criteria for that evaluation to decide what do you do with that. So you definitely are moving both forward. But that cone that was behind the picture on the previous one, that's kind of your solutions. You have a broad set, and as you go, you're narrowing the solution set, which is systems-based engineering, if you like that term.
Yeah, and that really leads right into this slide. Phil?
Sure. So we have two journeys. The left side of the journey is the mindset of the exploration. That is, we are trying to find these uncertainties and turn them into knowledge. On the right side, we have accumulated lots of knowledge. Can I now turn all those knowledge into systems thinking, integrate them and optimize them? So let's now talk about the left side of the journey. So when we talk about it's the uncertainties that actually causes the problem for many products to fail or many services to fail, well, what are the kinds of uncertainties? If you think about uncertainty, we can think about them in terms of knowledge and assumptions. Knowledge are the things that I know that I know. These are the known knowns. So that's high certainty. Then we have the world of known unknowns. I know that I don't know this. I know that I don't know the market share or the penetration or the price or customer adoption or the technology, or I'm making assumptions about them. So that's the things that known unknowns. Then we have the world of unknown unknowns, things that we didn't even know that we did not know. So if you put those last two categories, the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, into assumptions, and then the things we know that we know, that's the knowledge. So if we take the ratio of that assumptions to knowledge, in the early part of our journey, the assumptions are very high, knowledge is low since the ratio is very high. So our goal is to do experiments and all kinds of other ways, researches, to turn that assumptions into knowledge. And that's the goal. And to the question that was asked, yes, all of them could be evolving. So customer needs, technology feasibility, business model viability, customer adoption. Therefore, we have to be prepared for not get it done right first time. That's the mindset for the right side. Rather, can I learn as quickly and as cheaply as possible? So your metric is how much new stuff did I learn and how fast did I learn and how much did it cost me? So it's important to ask the question, which assumptions, if I am wrong, will cost me? And can I test those assumptions early on? So this picture illustrates the idea of maneuvering this left side in an iterative way. Can I define the opportunity that's focused on unmet customer needs? Then can I discover ideas that's focused on feasible solutions? Then can I develop the solutions? That's the developing of your architecture, developing of your business model, developing of how we will serve the customer. Demonstrating is demonstrating the innovation, demonstrating the feasibility. It's not about capability, it's more about feasibility. And therefore the dotted line shows the iterative nature. Unfortunately, time moves in linear fashion. So Jim, if you can click, it shows how we engage this through the journey of sprints. What is the idea behind a sprint? A sprint is we invest a little, learn a lot. Invest a little, learn more. Invest a little, learn more. So this is an organized, structured ways to learn these 4 key uncertainties. Sprint 1 is focused on, can I have a way to identify the customer's unmet need? What jobs are customers struggling to get done? For each job customer wants to get done, there are a solution neutral set of criteria, success and failure criteria. If I can ask the customers to find out how important is this and how satisfied are they, you can eventually come up with a set of unmet customer needs, underserved opportunities, high importance, low satisfaction, jobs to be done, or the requirements of the job. We move then down to sprint 2, where we exploring ideas. There is this flawed thinking that all the good ideas from out of the box. We need inside the box ideas and outside the box ideas, or paradigm consistent ideas, paradigm busting ideas, because the breakthrough can come from a radical departure from paradigm or a simply consistent with paradigm kind of ideas. The goal in that sprint early on is quantity as opposed to quality. Our goal is to find lots of ideas and then find the best ones that fits this need. Then we converge and explore which ideas will provide the best fit. Then in sprint 3, by the time we get to sprint 3, we have narrowed down the customer needs. We have some ideas. We are trying to match them to create design. If it's a hardware, it's a hardware design. If it's a business model, we are looking at assembling the 11 components to the business model and ask the question, will it fit? So at the end of sprint 3, you have several feasible concepts that we want to potentially feasible concept that you want to go test. Sprint 4 is about the idea of minimum viable product, minimum lovable product, all these concepts out there, but that's the thinking behind these sprints. At the end, one goal, more and more assumptions. I want to convert them into knowledge, and I want to come down on this ratio of assumption to knowledge, become smaller and smaller. And can I do it fast? Can I do it cheap? That's the metric.
Excellent. Shawn, any comments from your perspective on this?
I like the categories, right? Define, discover, develop, demonstrate. I like the gray arrows more than the yellow arrows, meaning you don't know where you're going to start. Plenty of times people have a good idea looking for a problem to solve. So they start with the ideas thing, and then they go to figure out the opportunity they need to fill with that, right? So I don't know if the starting point is always opportunity. It's probably the most common though, for sure. And then depending how you define sprint, typically for me, a sprint is 2 weeks. And so several of these might take more than just one sprint. But that's all semantics. The idea behind this and reducing our assumptions and creating knowledge goes back to the knowledge gap mapping I was talking about before, and assigning the risk levels. I feel like that's all right in line with what Phil's talking about here.
Actually, Mark, Shawn brought an important point. During COVID, we had to apply this model itself to the sprints. I used to lead lots of sprints of 3 days and 1 week and so forth. When COVID came out, it was debilitating in terms of physically meeting together to do sprint. What did we do? We invented sprint within sprint. We created hour-long sprint within a sprint. So we did many mini sprints inside the sprints. And so we can apply the model to yourself to this kind of a journey. Absolutely.
So that's probably a good lead in. Mark, any comments? We move to the next slide.
No, I think you guys have covered this very well. I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll move to Shawn, your slide here on.
Yep. So for anybody who doesn't know, SAFe is the scaled agile framework, and it really takes a lot of what we've talked about here and builds it into a system that sprints from end to end. It really sprints all the way from ideation through delivery and even to service and support and operations if you want to drive it that far. And you can see some of that right in the middle where it says Agile Release Train. There's those 3 circles: continuous exploration, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Where continuous exploration is the circle that was on the left of Phil's slide. We're continuously exploring customer needs, exploring business opportunities, and so on. The right blend of those, where we reduce the knowledge, reduce the assumptions, and increase the knowledge, the right batch of them moves over to integration, where we're actually doing new product development, whether it's software or hardware, we're getting things ready. And then the right amount of that, when it's mature enough and stable enough and reliable enough and scalable enough, moves into deployment, where we're deploying it to the field, whether that means turning it over to manufacturing, turning it over, deploying it on the website, whatever it means to deploy it out to our customers. And you can see a lot of the other stuff that you might have thought of as we were talking through these other things. On the left-hand side, you see the design thinking and customer centricity. So all this should be focused on customer needs. And then SAFe presents a model, much like Phil just said. There's sprints within a sprint. We call the bigger sprint a program increment, or a PI. They're generally about a quarter long, and that's broken into sprints, which are generally 2 weeks long. This is all highly flexible, and we always customize it and tailor it based on the customer's environment and customer's need. And if you go one more slide, we can actually take and layer on top of this a portfolio management process. All the way at the top there, you see, and up there we're exploring even new market segments, new demographics, whole new offerings. All that's what's coming in where it says enterprise and government, right? That's getting new stuff from the customer and new needs out there. So it's a big framework. It's a little overwhelming because of all the little icons on here, which it's worth saying that SAFe is meant for when you've got, let's say, a minimum of 100 people working on the same product. That's about when SAFe would start to make sense. Now, I've definitely worked with smaller companies, and what we do is we use the bits and pieces that make the most sense, but we don't wholesale implement SAFe. I mean, just an example, down the left-hand side, those are people you would have to hire to do SAFe or train up, right? So there's like 6 to 8 specific roles to fill. And it just doesn't make sense if you don't have a really big organization. So SAFe gives a nice framework for combining a lot of what we've seen here and bringing in a lot of the lean agile concepts into a structured framework. I do see another question here. It says, how do we know when enough to move from exploration to integration to deployment? So right in the middle, it says, go ahead and stay on that other one there, Jim. Right up at the top, see where it says portfolio Kanban? There's a Kanban at 2 levels, a program Kanban and a portfolio Kanban. So if you guys are familiar with Kanban systems, it's a set of columns, and each column has entry and exit criteria. And so we would define based on the customer, the scale, the marketplace, the maturity of the technology, we would define the entry and exit criteria for the columns that border the exploration, the integration, and the deployment. The move from exploration to integration is usually a business decided move. This technology, this market, this would make us money. So let's start to look at it from a technological standpoint. The integration, we're going to have some technical feasibility and some other stuff in there. And then the move from integration to deployment is usually more of a technical decision of, yep, it's stable enough, it's good enough, it's big enough. And then of course, deploying to the customer all the way at the right is back to a business decision usually. Those are generalities. It's always customized based on the customer's need. But that's the answer to that question. So that's a quick overview. I know we're looking at time, so I want to make sure we get time for Mark or Phil or Jim, if you had specific things on SAFe you wanted to touch on, or if you see something else in the questions that I don't see quite yet.
Mark? Yeah.
So there is a question in here about getting started. So what are the first steps, like you would tell somebody to say if you want to either go, maybe you're not that 100 people on a project company, what would you say to get started in this sort of an arena?
You know what? I think it's the same as what Phil described in his 4Ds. What problem are you trying to solve? Why do you think you want to go agile? Why do you think you want to go SAFe? So the first thing is define the problem you're trying to solve, the job to be done. And from there, we could decide, then you could, talk to me or Jim or Mark or Phil, talk to an expert and say, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. Here's my current situation. What do you think? And so in the right circumstances, SAFe is a good answer. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just, oh, you know what? If we just teach you how to do some sprints and a little bit of work in process limiting, you'll be okay, right? So define the problem you're trying to solve and then decide if this is the right answer or not.
Phil, any comments from your perspective of looking at this versus the way you've been doing it? You're on mute.
It's got to happen at least once, right? You're still muted, buddy.
So the potential risk for all models are wrong. Some are more useful than the other. So if I look at any model, that's the question you ask, what's the strength and the weakness? So a temptation when you do a agile sprint is, let's say in the software world, you collected a bunch of user story and you're building something. Well, many people, not all the time, has a danger of local optimizing something, not having enough systems thinking to ask the question, how does the whole integrated system look like? Are there dependencies or complexities? Or if you want to think about Professor Namsu from MIT's model of the architecture, is it coupled, decoupled, or is it uncoupled? A lot of designs are actually coupled. I fix this or I change this, something else is gone. So a danger with the agile framework is to ask the question, are you just fixing the stuff or doing this locally? Or when you build this, all these Lego sets, will they all fit together? And that's a key concept to ask. A framework like SAFe helps solve that problem. And many companies are missing the boat on that whole integration and thinking it holistically. They keep fixing A, and then another team is doing B, and then they're fighting A versus B. I also want to address
constraints, right, Phil?
That's right.
They're actually creating constraints in their new designs.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the other, go ahead.
Absolutely. So if we have that many people touching something, that's why right towards the bottom, you see this red squiggly line. It says architectural runway. And one thing we try to do in SAFe, we have intentional architecture with emergent design. And what we mean by that is that little dude up at the top that says enterprise architect, he defines the architectural guardrails. And then the teams evolve the architecture within those guardrails. So if I tell 18 teams, go make me a mobile application, I'm going to get an Android app and a Windows app, and some team that hasn't followed technology is going to make a BlackBerry app, right? The architect says, no, we're going to make an iOS app. It's going to work on iOS version 87, blah, 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 blah. And then the team emerges the design within those guardrails. So really good point, because I've definitely come into places that had big monolithic spaghetti architecture. In one group, I came in and I actually told them, look, if you paid me for advice, here's my advice: no new features for 6 months, none, no new features. And I sold them on it, and they stabilized their platform. They moved towards a modular software architecture for 6 months. And at the end of that, they could release features faster. And in the following 6 months, they released more features than they could have in the previous 6 months. So sometimes you got to bite that bullet and fix that architecture that Phil's talking about. You had something else, Phil. You were going somewhere else before I jumped in there.
So earlier on, there was a question on when do I know I had enough? So I think about that ratio of assumption to knowledge. You will never get to zero, or the cost to make it zero is exponentially high when you get the majority. So, in that slide, Jim, I had, when you're coming down on the curve, it never hits the zero. Right there, at one point, when the curve comes down, you have to draw a line and say, this is good enough for me to now move from function development over to the other side of product development. It's a question of how much risk are you willing to take, how much risk is for the stakeholders and the customers. If you are producing something that has safety involvement, like a medical device, versus I am building a new kind of shoes at the Nike factory, the cutoff line would be very different. So that's what we need to ask the question: what cutoff line is the right line to switch from A to B, that is function development to product development, based on the consequences of the decision.
Yep, I like that. And that's when it, like to talk about with the knowledge gap mapping, we have a percentage. When we get below a certain percentage, then it's a risk versus reward. At that point, the reward is bigger than the risk. So let's go.
Great dialogue. I'm going to move to the last polling question just to get this and drive the finishing dialogue on which NPI approach would bring your company the greatest value from where you're at today. It's more of a question of, you may be sprint focused, maybe you need a little bit more phase gate, you may be safe focused, maybe, what would you like to see going forward in your company as you grow? And so there's no right or wrong here, just trying to gain an understanding, and it's all over the board, it looks like.
I think there's a right and wrong.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
And the right answer is D. Always. No one thing, and somebody said this, Phil said it, no one thing is the right answer. Looking at the context, understanding the customer situation, and then choosing the right things from all three of these, plus 5 more we haven't talked about. That's always the right answer.
Yeah, you got to make it fit the company. No argument there.
Yeah, I'm going to argue with that a little bit from the standpoint that there's a lot of times people try to invent it from the ground up, and they don't need to. There's there's a lot of stuff that goes on in this sort of a process that you can copy from other people, and you don't. I've seen homegrown NPI processes that you just sit there and say, the best practice in this area is out there. Why don't you use it? That sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely don't go from the ground up, but also don't just close your eyes and follow somebody else's plan.
Yeah.
Phil?
There's a famous saying that is the paradox of structure. All structures are enabling and all structures are limiting at the same time. So the key word is at the same time. So the fact that other people have invented the wheel, let's take advantage of the lessons learned. So if you study the history of innovation, it used to be totally ad hoc. We've done several webinars on engineer-driven to inventor-driven, all that stuff. We made huge progress in the right side, that is product development, the phase gate approach, in the last 25 years. And we've increased the odds of success quite a bit. The left side hadn't made that much improvement. So we have been learning in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years on the left side about maneuvering the world through the uncertainties and creating certainties, learning fast, learning quick, all that stuff. So why reinvent those lessons again and again. So that's where the point about let's leverage those concepts. Now the structure is enabling in that sense. Well, the structure is also limiting. If you try and cut and paste what works at Google in your company or what works at Nike in your company, it may not fit your culture. It may not fit your market need. It may not fit your stakeholders situation. So you have to adopt it and make it and change it. So creating flexibility, yet leveraging what has been useful best practices. By the way, that's an oxymoron. We should still be able to come up with what's right for you.
So there's a going on in the chat right now. There's some comments coming in, and one is it's about a question of why is the customized approach right? And I think we've talked some about that. But then there's a follow-on of couldn't they be using the wrong approach? And to your example, Shawn, that you gave, need someone to tell them to try something else. How do you deal with that?
Well, and that's, yeah, and when the person put the why is customized right, I agree. Hopefully the conversation actually fixed that. I'm not saying custom build from the ground up a whole new approach every time. I'm saying, hey, let's use 80% of safe and 10% of phase gates. Like I do that one a lot because a lot of my customers are medical devices, and you do need certain phase gates, like 3. But we do a lot of safe between those phase gates. And could they be using the wrong approach? Absolutely. I mean, that's how the 4 of us make a living, is by coming in and looking and saying, hey, there's a better way to do this. Would you try this? Would you try this? Would you try this? So definitely there's the wrong approach, and then there's ever moving towards the perfect right approach, but never getting there.
I find often that there's no approach.
Yes.
Yeah, that's generally the case. It's the convenient truth is what I see the most when you start, and it's what people are most comfortable with.
There's always pathologies when you come in, and there's good solutions to some of those pathologies out there, but there's some of the others that you need to deal with that will be, more focused on that particular business or that particular business model. So,
and I think the customized approach, when looking at it from that perspective, you're taking the best out of those 3 and whatever other best practices that are out there, and making it fit your environment. I mean, but if you have hardware and software moves faster than hardware, let's say, obviously they should not be operating at the same cadence or be under the same rules. So you're going to have to think about customizing each of those approaches, but then they cannot be decoupled completely. They're still dependent on each other. So
I do hardware software a lot, and we'll do, like, the software guys work on a 2-week sprint, and the hardware guys work on a 4-week sprint, but they line up every other software sprint and every hardware, because they get system integration, all this other stuff. But you absolutely have to tweak and customize this stuff.
Yeah.
So folks, we're at the hour. I think we're going to lose Phil because he has another commitment. But I think we can hang on for a few minutes more if folks want to.
Are there more questions?
Have any other questions and stuff?
I mean, if there's more questions, we can answer them. If Phil, you got to go, you got to go.
You appreciate the opportunity.
Questions out there? If
Yeah,
not,
there's one, and I'm not sure how well we've answered it already, but there's, Agile was developed in the software world. Are there examples of effective application to large physical products like jet engines and CT scanners?
I haven't done jet engines. I've done CTs, MRIs, locomotives, something called large drive controllers. They control big motors that move chemicals through pipes at plants. I've done portable defibrillators.
Wow.
Yeah, large drives, LD teams.
large drive systems.
On the small side, I've done portable defibrillators, toothbrush. So yeah, I mean, all kinds of hardware, software. If you Google Scrum for hardware, or is it Agile for hardware? I forget which. There's a guy, Joe Justice, who used it to build cars. And there's a book out there. It's an EPUB book that's a really, really cool read. Talks about modular interfaces and stuff like that at the technical level.
Good.
Excellent. Any other questions, Mark, out there?
I there may be one more. Let me just go back. It was fairly early on. Oh, and this one is about the cross-functional. So how do you, we've talked, I don't know if we've really talked mostly about development organizations, but how do you get other things like purchasing, manufacturing, regulatory? How do you get them involved in these, especially in the sprints, it says?
If you go back to 2 slides, Jim, when you look at the portfolio level safe, they actually add this tab up at the top. It says business agility, and the one forward right there, the business agility. We're really looking at the whole. See, it says operational value stream. That's meant to be everything from taking the order, delivering the order, servicing the order, collecting the revenue, and each different supporting. So the operational value stream is all of those. Each supporting function can potentially be doing their own sprints, doing their own things. And we have these big planning events called PI planning events that happen once a quarter. And all the relevant groups send representatives, and we talk about where we're trying to go in the next quarter with the organization. Now, 90% of my time, we start in R&D and then grow out organically with adjacent functions and then adjacent functions, but we end up with business level agility.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, are we set on questions, Mark?
I think so. I think that is looking at it, I think we've covered the comments and the questions that we've gotten.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and just to let you know, we'll be resuming in January. We wish you all the best for the holidays. As I mentioned earlier, we have webinars on, we'll resume this series, as well as supply chain risk and resiliency, artificial intelligence and digital twins, and among some other new in a new webinar series that we're working on. So we look forward to sharing those with you next year, and we wish you all the best for the holidays. And again, Mark, any closing comments?
No, I think we've covered everything that we wanted to cover. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Shawn, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, and it was fun. I hope people gained from it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Thanks, everyone, and have a great holiday season. Cheers.